Have you ever met someone who seems carefully edited? Like every word, every smile, every pause feels just a little too practiced. Not fake, but filtered. Even in safe, familiar spaces, there's this quiet distance, a sense that something real is being held just beneath the surface. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it just looks like someone who never shares a strong opinion, or someone who smiles on cue, even when they're clearly tired, or someone who avoids eye contact whenever the topic gets personal. They blend in. They're agreeable, likable, but under the surface, they're working overtime to keep parts of themselves hidden. And it's not because they're trying to deceive anyone. That's what makes this so tricky. Most people who hide themselves aren't lying, they're protecting. The real question is, what happened that made it feel safer to disappear than to be known? Somewhere along the way, they got the message that being fully themselves was too much, or not enough, or just weird. Maybe it was a parent who criticized every little outburst, or classmates who laughed when they opened up, or a workplace where vulnerability turned into gossip. So they learned to trim down their personality, like pruning a tree into a neat shape that wouldn't offend anyone. Psychologists call this self-concealment, the act of intentionally hiding distressing or identity-related information from others. And it turns out, it's more common than you might think. In fact, some studies suggest that the more socially anxious or sensitive someone is, the more likely they are to mask themselves in daily life. And while it might work in the short term, over time, it comes at a cost. Because when you always play a role, you start to lose the script. You might notice it in small ways, like hesitating before you speak, wondering what version of yourself would be most appropriate for this group, or feeling strangely disconnected after socializing, like you were present, but not quite you. And eventually, if the mask is on long enough, you forget what it felt like to speak without rehearsing. I remember a friend once told me, the worst loneliness isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by people who don't actually know you. That stuck with me, because some of the loneliest people aren't isolated. They're just really good at hiding. There's also a kind of psychological exhaustion that quietly builds up. Some people, in order to fit in, get used to constantly adjusting how they talk, react, and express themselves, just to seem more normal or acceptable. They get so good at hiding their natural responses that it becomes automatic. But over time, this takes a toll. Mentally and emotionally, it wears them down. They keep going, smiling, chatting, showing up. But deep inside, they feel drained. And in the long run, it can even affect their health. But this isn't just a rare phenomenon. It shows up in different ways. The friend who's always the funny one but never gets taken seriously. The quiet kid who says yes to everything to avoid conflict. The coworker who never asks for help because they're afraid of seeming weak. Social media doesn't help either. It rewards performance, not presence. People learn to wear masks before they even know who they are underneath. And each time they post something a little too real, the fear kicks in. Was that too honest? So they stick to polished smiles and safe captions, hoping to avoid judgment. And over time, the fear of being seen becomes second nature. You smile automatically. You avoid depth. You say, I'm fine, even when you're anything but. Because somewhere along the way, you started believing that if people really saw you, they'd walk away. But the parts of you you've been hiding, they might be the most beautiful, the most magnetic, the most deeply human parts of all. Maybe no one ever told you that before. So let this be a beginning. Not of fixing yourself, but of gently noticing. Catching yourself mid-mask and asking, is this really me? Not judging, just becoming aware. Because hiding isn't weakness, it's a survival strategy. But if you do it long enough, survival turns into silence. And you deserve to be heard. But when you finally start showing who you really are, something strange happens. It doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like a hangover. You say something honest, maybe too honest, and the moment it leaves your mouth, panic sets in. Was that too much? Did I overshare? Should I have just smiled instead? That's what psychologists call a vulnerability hangover. It's the emotional whiplash of being real in a world where you're used to being edited. And yes, it can feel awful. But it's also the first sign that you're stepping out of the fog. When you've spent years, maybe decades, curating every word, adjusting every tone, hiding every impulsive thought, but it's also how you slowly come back to yourself. I still remember the first time I let someone see the parts of me I usually hide. It was nothing dramatic, just a random late night conversation with someone I trusted. I mentioned how I overthink small things for hours, how I replay conversations in my head like broken tapes, how sometimes I say it's fine just so people don't worry, even when it's really not. I expected silence, awkwardness, maybe even judgment, but they just said, yeah, me too. That tiny moment shattered years of shame. Because once you realize you're not alone, the hiding loses some of its power. According to research from Dr. Brené Brown and others, one of the biggest antidotes to shame is connection through honesty. When you share even one true thing, and someone sees it and stays, the rules in your head start to rewrite themselves. You realize that maybe you weren't too much. Maybe you were just surrounded by people who only like the quieter version. Of course, this doesn't mean you suddenly tell everyone everything. Boundaries still matter. Not everyone deserves your truth, but the key difference is you get to decide when you're hiding out of fear and when you're choosing privacy with intention. Over time, as you practice being more open, your brain adjusts. The alarms soften. You learn to tolerate the discomfort. And sometimes, miraculously, you even start enjoying the moments where you don't have to filter yourself. There's also something called identity integration. It's when all the roles you play, friend, coworker, child, partner, stop competing and start blending. You stop switching masks depending on the room you're in. You stop wondering who you need to be today because it's always just you. That's when life gets quieter and somehow fuller. So if you're someone who's spent years hiding, please know this. The real you is not a burden. You don't need to be polished to be accepted. You don't need to shrink to be safe. You were never meant to be someone else's idea of appropriate. You were meant to be you. Odd, thoughtful, layered, full of contradictions. And yeah, some people won't get it. That's okay. They don't need to. The ones who do, they'll feel like air after too long underwater. So take your time, show up slowly, a little more each day. If this hits something in you, if you've ever hidden who you are just to feel accepted, hit that subscribe button. This channel is for you. And if you feel like it, leave a comment sharing a moment when you didn't hide. Big or small. I read them all. And you never know. Your story might give someone else the courage to finally show up too.